pointless. Let's do this whole theme song and make up a vocal rhyme for the story about Cletus finding boots that Brandine quickly rejects. It's got some of that Chief Wiggum energy from before, where I just enjoy listening to them banter. Cletus's delivery of "to waits for a woman of less discriminating tastes" will forever live rent-free in my brain. And then closing with her ma on her dang roof. God, it's so corny, I feel like Nelson from earlier. I'm just spellbound by it. I couldn't put it at number 1 because, you know, but this thing deserves more respect. It is the perfect Cletus segment. I just think steamed hams is neat. Look, you don't need me explaining why steamed hams is the best. Liking this thing is a cliche by now. I've talked about it before, so I'll keep it brief. I think it's a deserving number 1 pick because it does everything well from every other segment. Great concept, very meta, fun title sequence, clever dialogue, cartoony escalation, and an amazing punchline. Come on, it's steamed hams. What I'm more interested is in hearing from all of you. What are your favorite segments in 22 short films about Springfield? Is steamed hams your number 1? Or do you dare defy the Simpsons canon like some wretched shirkaday? It was pretty weird trying to rank all these, to be honest. It was like ranking my favorite jokes from Last Exit to Springfield. Also, go check out Citizen Hal's video too. He ranks some of these segments way differently than mine. So if you think I was unfair to your favorite, maybe you would like his picks more. Comedy is so subjective, it's interesting what kind of stuff everyone gravitates to most. As always, thanks for watching.
Ambla back in season 4, but he was lucky enough to avoid actually being assaulted, so I'm not going to count that. And even though this is the first time we see Butters experience major trauma, that doesn't mean they go easy on him, because it's definitely one of the worst things he's experienced. So his parents' wedding anniversary is coming up, and his mom encourages him to spy on his dad while he shops for her anniversary gift so that she can gift him something of equal quality. What I'm sure he did not expect to see was his father visiting an adult movie theater and cruising gay bathhouses. Because he's such a lovable and innocent child, he has no understanding of what he's seeing, so he snaps some pics and shows them to his mom. Predictably, this leads to a full-on psychotic break from his mother, who decides to do the only rational thing.
Must kill Butters.
Fortunately for Butters, he not only survives his mother's attempt at his life, but is still completely unaware of what's actually going on. This includes his mother's attempt to murder him, his father's infidelity, and his mother's attempt at her own life later on. That is, until they describe it in detail in front of him, causing him to come to a disturbing realization.
I was going to gay movie and bathhouses and having sex with random men who were complete strangers.
Yeah. Wait, what?
I went crazy and I drove my son into the lake to kill him.
Kill me? Jesus Christ!
So yeah, right out the gate, Matt and Trey let us know that Butters will be experiencing some seriously messed up stuff. Unfortunately for Butters, there are about 20 more seasons worth of opportunities for the writers to traumatize him, and as you'll see, they will be taking full advantage.
When I have a Chipotle blue cheese bacon burger at Bennigan's, I'll forget all about my dad being queer and my mom trying to kill me. I'm gonna be okay. Really? No, I'm lying.
Now, it's pretty clear that the writers realized they had struck gold with Butters' character, since they decided to subject him to more torment in the very next episode. Throughout Season 6, the boys continuously remind him that he's an inferior friend to Kenny, who died semi-permanently at the end of Season 5 and is absent throughout the entirety of Season 6. I made a whole video about that a long time ago. It's actually one of my first South Park videos on this channel, so if you want to check it out, feel free to do so. So as you could imagine, being constantly told that your friends like their other friend who recently died way better better than you would probably be pretty damaging to your psyche, but that's not the trauma we're talking about here. The boys realize that they can use this to manipulate Butters into doing whatever they want him to do, so they take advantage of this. They come up with a plan to get rich by gaining a bunch of weight and then losing it by only eating City Walk. They were inspired to do this by Jared Fogel's campaign with Subway. Man, I haven't heard that name in a while. I wonder what that dude's up to nowadays. So they managed to fatten Butters up, but they didn't take into account how difficult it would be to actually lose the weight, so they come up with a new plan to perform some homemade liposuction surgery. And this goes exactly as well as you would expect it to go, and Butters' parents find him in a rather unfortunate position.
This is unbelievable. How many times have we told you never to have self-performed liposuction surgery in our house?
4 times, Mom.
Well, I guess that wasn't enough.
Now, technically, his reaction to this doesn't necessarily indicate that he's been traumatized, but I can't imagine going through a botched operation like that and having no lingering effects on your mental health. Regardless, in the same episode, Butters is grounded due to his liposuction surgery, so Cartman stays at his house to talk to his parents on the phone while Butters goes to finish their plan. Cartman puts on his best Butters impression and says some pretty terrible stuff to his parents, leading to his parents coming home and physically abusing him. Now, this is the only time we actually witnessed this from his parents, but the fact that they were willing to do it at all suggests that it's probably not that uncommon. I don't think I need to tell you that that can be pretty damaging to a child's mental health. After this, Butters makes it through season 6 mostly unscathed, with only small moments of trauma, like when he's convinced to go on the Maury show with balls on his chin pretending to have a deformity for a prize. He joins a union of people with deformities and lives in constant fear of being found out. Luckily for him, they don't actually end up finding him out, but he does get grounded. In episode 7, he also suffers from a psychotic break after every supervillain idea he comes up with has already been done by The Simpsons, but eventually he comes to the realization that it doesn't matter and everything turns out okay. So nothing too traumatizing throughout the rest of season 6, that is, until we get to episode 3. When Butters tries to watch Lord of the Rings on DVD, he accidentally ends up watching the notorious adult video entitled Backdoor Sluts 9 after Randy mixed it up with the Lord of the Rings DVD. Now, it's pretty well known that content like this can be pretty damaging to the mind, especially as he devolves into a golem-like creature who refers to the tape as his precious. Coincidentally, the boys are playing Lord of the Rings, having just watched the film, and as they venture to return the tape to the rental place, Butters is continuously chasing them down, trying to get his hands on the tape again. When the boys finally make it to the Dropbox, Butters grabs onto the tape and refuses to let go. Seeing no other option, Kyle throws the tape into the Dropbox along with Butters. In the last shot of the episode, we see Butters laying in the Dropbox, clutching onto his copy of Backdoor Sluts 9.
Movies has our preciouses. Has it.
When Kyle decides to go to Casa Bonita for his birthday, Cartman is absolutely distraught when he invites someone else instead of him. Can you guess who he invited instead of Cartman? Butters, of course, and when Cartman realizes that Butters is in his place, he recognizes an opportunity to take advantage of his innocence. The plan? First, pretend to be genuine and apologize to Kyle. He'll buy it and invite Cartman as a backup if Butters is unable to make it. Next, go to Butters and convince him that an apocalyptic meteor is heading straight for Earth. Take him to Uncle Jimbo's bomb shelter and lock him in there all alone for an entire week. This plays out mostly according to plan, and Butters is left believing that the apocalypse has happened and him and Cartman are the only survivors. After the town begins to expand their search efforts, Cartman then takes Butters out of the bomb shelter and takes him to the outskirts of town with a blindfold on. He then pretends to be attacked and killed by cannibals and locks him in an old broken fridge. The fridge is then picked up and taken to the garbage dump where Butters begins to rebuild society all alone. A garbage lady eventually reveals the truth to him, and everything turns out okay in the end. But for a week, Butters was left all alone in a bomb shelter believing that the apocalypse happened, everyone he loved was dead, and his only surviving friend was killed by cannibals trying to save him. I can only imagine how damaging all of that would be to an 8-year-old boy, and because of that, I can pretty confidently say that this is the most traumatic event that he's experienced so far. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about this one since I have an entire video about it, which you can check out, but in episode 14 of season 7, Butters falls in love with a waitress at Raisins. Because of his innocence, he doesn't understand that she's flirting with him for tips, and he goes through all of the emotions that come along with a first love. When she inevitably lets Butters know that they aren't dating, he is absolutely heartbroken. Despite his heartbreak, he still has a pretty positive outlook on the situation, and it's debatable whether or not this would even be considered a traumatic event, but I figured I'd mention it mostly so you guys go watch my video. You see, Season 8 is where they really begin to get sadistic with the Butters torture. We get a hot start to the season with good times with weapons, in which the boys play with some ninja weapons they bought from the flea market. Butters wants to play with them, so he becomes Professor Chaos. They get a bit carried away, and Kenny throws a shuriken directly into Butters' eye. If that wasn't bad enough, the rest of the episode follows the boys making the situation just so much worse. First, they try to yank it out with a pair of pliers, which is incredibly hard to watch, and because they're the worst, most selfish people ever, they come up with a plan to disguise Butters as a dog and bring him to the vet so that they can get him medical attention without their parents finding out. They cover him in dog hair and force him to bark before making their trip to the vet.
Alright, now we just gotta sneak him into town.
They get distracted by a battle, and Butters fortunately slips away, barely making it to the hospital and collapsing in the lobby. Unfortunately for him, the disguise was incredibly believable.
Can you help him, Doctor?
I'm afraid I wouldn't know how. Unfortunately for this little fella, I'm a people doctor.
As if things couldn't get any worse, he ends up in a cage at the animal shelter, where many of the dogs see him as a fresh patch of grass. The workers then decide to euthanize him, but he's able to get away. He ends up at the town auction and is finally given medical attention. You know, despite how terrible it must have been, I can't imagine it was quite as traumatizing as believing everyone you know is dead, but it seems like probably a pretty close second. After Stan gets served and then serves the kids back, it's on.
So now, I guess, it's on.
Because of this, Stan begins searching for a fourth member to join his dance crew, and he learns that Butters was a state champion tap dancer. This seems like a natural choice, but when he asks Butters about it, he seems completely terrified at the thought. We later learn that during his routine at the state championships, one of his shoes flies off of his foot and hits a light, causing a chain reaction that leads to the gruesome deaths of 8 people in the crowd. Side note, I'm like 90% sure that this sequence is supposed to be a parody of Final Destination, but I've never actually seen anyone confirm that, so I figured I'd just throw it out there. Interestingly enough, this is the trauma that we can see affects him more than anything else. Throughout the episode, he has panic attacks and flashbacks anytime tap dancing is mentioned, and his mother discusses the many years of therapy he went through following the incident. In fact, his main storyline throughout the episode follows him as he grapples with overcoming this trauma. By the end of the episode, he comes through for Stan and shows up to the dance battle. So even though this was his worst trauma, he was able to overcome it by the end, so I guess this one doesn't really count. Oh, wait, I forgot about the exact same thing also happens again at the end, so it kind of just redoes all the trauma. Never mind. It's still pretty bad.
No! No!
Continuing on through Season 8, Episode 10 sees the boys' greatest fear come true as Trent Boyette is released from juvie. Back in preschool, they asked him to start a fire so that they could play firemen, but when they couldn't put it out, it permanently disfigures their teacher and gets Trent sent to juvie. Butters wasn't even playing, he just happened to be watching, and he refused to defend Trent out of fear of being grounded. So when Butters learns that he's been freed, he immediately begins hiding in his room out of fear. Of course, his parents see this and force him to go outside and play, where Trent Boyette is waiting for him. He enacts his revenge on Butters brutally and swiftly, using every painful move a bully knows. This leaves Butters comatose in the hospital.
He received a massive snuggie. He also received 2 Indian sunburns on his forearms, a Charlie horse on the thigh, and a second-degree titty twister. It also looks like he received a noogie and a Polish bike ride.
What's that?
We aren't sure. We only know that there is no cure.
Surely reliving every agonizing Indian sunburn and titty twister over and over again in his dreams. One could only imagine how terrible it must be. So we finish Butters' legendary run through Season 8 with one of my personal favorites. Paris Hilton is visiting South Park, and after her dog passes away under mysterious circumstances, she's left devastated, until she spots her new replacement pet.
I want that! I want that!
Lou, 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 I've got some apples. Lou, 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 you got some too?
Butters is then abducted and placed in a bear costume by Paris Hilton. When his parents find out, they're against it at first, but Paris Hilton then offers them $200 million to take him with her. Predictably, his parents request an extra $50 million on top and take the deal. Now, it's already pretty messed up for Butters to watch as his parents sell him to some random lady while he's begging them not to, but what makes it significantly worse is that they tell him they won't sell him if he's able to come up with $250 million himself. His dad encourages him to take after his grandfather and mine coal to make the money. This leads to Butters spending the entire day digging outside until his parents eventually return with the check from Paris Hilton and send him on his way.
Well, Butters, how'd it go? Did you dig up $200 million worth of coal?
Well, no, not quite.
Oh, well, too bad. Miss Hilton did raise the money, so you'll be going off with her.
To me, this is kind of the perfect example of how they managed to make Butters being traumatized funny in this show, because it just gets more and more absurd as the episode goes on. First, he's abducted by the least likable person ever, then his parents agree to sell him to this person despite his pleas, then his dad encourages him to spend his entire day doing hard manual labor while being fully aware that his efforts are futile, which results in him believing that it's his fault since he wasn't able to make the money. It just gets worse and worse for him to the point where you can't help but laugh because it's just so ridiculous. And that's kind of the point of this video, to highlight that even though it's incredibly messed up what happens to Butters on a regular basis, it's definitely one of the funniest running gags in the show. Now this one is probably the most iconic Butters trauma because the clip has gone viral many times and it makes for a great thumbnail. It's definitely the edgiest and most brutal way they've decided to torture him. It's the type of clip you would expect to see in one of those South Park dark humor compilations. In fact, if you just look up Butters trauma on YouTube, the first 3 videos are all this clip. So Butters' parents begin to believe that he's completely psychotic after he starts claiming to see a dead Cartman, and this gets him institutionalized. At the psych facility, they do some testing to see what is causing this psychosis, and this testing is a bit unorthodox. So unorthodox, in fact, that it looks less like something you would use for testing and more like something you would find on today's sponsor, Adam and... Oh, okay, no, I cannot keep that in, Jesus Christ. I can't really show any of this for obvious reasons, but when the testing is finished, we learn that they were testing for 14 hours. Pretty sure I don't need to explain how this would be traumatic. Well, this one's definitely super iconic. I'm actually not much of a fan of it. I generally prefer the more psychological Butters trauma experiences, but at the end of the day, this one's iconic for a reason. It's shocking enough to make the viewer laugh, even if it's out of just pure uncomfortableness, and at the very least, it's in the top 3 of his most traumatic experiences.
Don't worry, Mr. Stotch. Whatever traumatized your son in his past, we'll find it.
This next one's pretty short, but it's realistic in a way that we don't normally see with Butters' trauma. So during the school talent show, Butters attempted to perform his iconic Apple song, but he ends up forgetting all of the lyrics and ends up peeing his pants on stage. If there's one piece of advice I would give to Butters, it seems like it's best for him to avoid performing on stages at all costs. So it's nothing too bad, but it's definitely embarrassing enough that you would have nightmares about it years later. When the boys need a spy to sneak into the girls' sleepover to steal their future-telling device, it was pretty much a foregone conclusion who would be attending. They go all out with the realism, and to ensure that no one is searching for Butters while he's gone, they do the only logical thing and fake his death by throwing a pig carcass off a skyscraper in front of his parents. Ironically, his parents are the ones that are traumatized this time, and they slowly begin to lose it, and his dad decides to do the only logical thing and goes full pet cemetery. He buries the body at the old Indian burial ground in the hopes of resurrecting his son. When Butters eventually reveals that he isn't actually dead, his parents are completely convinced that the process worked and he's some sort of resurrected monstrosity. They do the only logical thing and chain him up in the basement for their own safety. Butters is just kind of confused by all this, so he lets them know that he's really hungry. Of course, since he's a monster in their eyes, they misunderstand what he wants to eat and get an interior designer to look at the house. They do the only logical thing and lure her into the basement and murder her with a shovel in front of Butters, telling him to eat her. Again, not the worst thing he's experienced, but I definitely don't envy him.
Can't I just have some SpaghettiOs?
Season 10 and 11 don't really have any major traumatic moments for Butters, but there are a few smaller ones, so let's rapid fire through them real quick. In The Return of Chef, he mentions a previous experience he had with a family member that has some very traumatic implications.
My Uncle Bud did that to me once.
In Go God Go, he believes that he accidentally killed Cartman after helping him with a plan to freeze himself, then unfreeze himself so that he doesn't have to wait until the release of the Nintendo Wii. In Cartman Sucks, he is essayed by Cartman and sent to gay conversion camp, but he's totally oblivious to the entire situation, so this one doesn't really count. But while at conversion camp, he does witness several other campers ending their own lives, so that probably wasn't very fun to see. And this one's not really a traumatic event as much as it is a representation of his trauma, but in Imagination Land, we see how he imagines his father as a monster who's constantly grounding him. Cartman becomes convinced that the Chinese are taking over the world after watching the Olympics, and he takes Butters to do some investigative work at P.F. Chang's. Things go south quickly, and Cartman ends up taking everyone hostage, forcing Butters to go along with it. He gives Butters a gun, and throughout the episode, Butters is constantly accidentally shooting men in the dick. Cartman then proceeds to shame him every time, even though he was the one encouraging him to shoot people in the first place, and Butters clearly feels really bad about it.
Can't believe you, Butters.
Butters is queefed on by one of the girls at school. No further explanation necessary. Butters is queefed on by one of the girls at school. No further explanation necessary. In a very similar situation to Butters being forced to shoot people by Cartman, in Sexual Healing, Butters and Kyle are forced by the US government to kill an alien who they determine is the cause of wealthy men cheating on their wives. You know, if you haven't seen the episode, you're probably incredibly confused right now, but don't worry, it's a whole thing. We don't gotta get into it right now. But unfortunately for Butters and Kyle, the alien they have to kill is very obviously a man wearing an alien costume, but they're forced into shooting him several times each anyways. They even have to reload in order to take more shots. Like, the government definitely wanted them to be fully intentional in their actions, and that's pretty messed up. So in the Coon and Friends extended universe, Butters plays a supervillain while all the other boys play superheroes. Because they really get into their roleplay, during the Coon and Friends trilogy, they end up actually treating him as a supervillain by locking him in their jail for close to a week.
Yeah, but you only gave me this bucket to poop in, and it's full now, and I ain't got nothing to eat. You got poop, don't you?
To make it even worse, he's only let out to be a part of Cartman's scheme to blackmail Captain Hindsight, which includes him dressing up as Courtney Love and posing with a naked homeless man. Again, don't worry about that. I don't want to explain it. In this one, Butters inadvertently causes an Asian turf war and is grounded because of it. Again, don't ask. His parents assume something is wrong with him, so they take him to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist identifies several personalities within Butters and diagnoses him with multiple personality disorder. Of course, these other personalities are just the imagination of a child, but he's treated regardless. During his sessions with the psychiatrist, it quickly becomes clear that the psychiatrist is the one suffering from multiple personality disorder, and that's pretty terrifying to Butters. He encourages Butters to set up a camera to record him while he sleeps, and after watching it back in the morning, Butters sees the psychiatrist break into his room and urinate all over him while he sleeps. When Butters tries to tell him about it, one of the personalities of the psychiatrist force him to help him break into a jewelry store to rob it. Mid-robbery, he all of a sudden switches back and thinks that this was all Butters' idea, calling the police. Butters then decides to get rid of all of the costumes he plays with because he's just so tired of getting in trouble and dealing with this psychiatrist. The psychiatrist then begins chasing Butters, looking like Billy the Puppet, catching up to him and tackling him. He then kidnaps Butters, threatening that one of his alters has a gun. You know, I'm realizing that it's really difficult to explain this when, like, one character has 4 different characters inside them. It makes it very confusing. Well, basically, all you need to know is that Butters ends up in his house getting chased by the psychiatrist as he switches between personalities, and it's pretty terrifying, and I'm sure he was traumatized. After Cartman conspires to rig the 2012 election, Kyle realizes that Butters knows why he did it. He starts questioning him, but Butters refuses to croak, pulling out an almond M&M and threatening to swallow it. This would essentially be an attempt at his own life, since he's highly allergic to almonds. The pressure boils over and he ends up swallowing it. He survives and is further questioned by Kyle, with Kyle threatening to tell his father if he doesn't tell them what he knows. And eventually he does end up caving in. This was definitely all Cartman's idea, and the fact that Butters just accepted his own death and ended up in the hospital is certainly a testament to the fear he has around Cartman. In Butterballs, Butters spends pretty much the whole episode dealing with his grandma bullying him. Obviously, experiencing bullying on his own is often incredibly traumatic for many, so you could only imagine how it would be even more traumatic when it's coming from a close family member. And she treats him absolutely terribly, calling him horrible names as well as physically abusing him. It's implied that this is the case every time his grandma is around, so we don't even know the full extent of this. Butters eventually turns to the only thing that he can think to do by becoming Professor Chaos, and despite his best efforts, she even has him beaten there with a supervillain alter ego of her own. And even though by the end of the episode Butters gets the last laugh and is able to accept what his grandma has done to him, it is undeniable that this certainly was traumatizing for him.
And you'll die, being nothing but you. Night, Grandma.
When Cartman can't handle reading the negative comments on his social media pages, PC Principal decides to appoint a student to filter out all the hate and print out only the positive comments. Can you guess who this student is? He threatens him with detention if he refuses, and of course Butters can't get detention or else he'd be grounded, so he accepts. This job proves to be much more mentally taxing than he expected, especially when having to filter out hate comments directed towards Cartman of all people. PC Principal then continues to offer Butters service for more and more people, not only overwhelming him with an insane amount of work, but also forcing him to be constantly reading some of the most heinous things human beings are capable of saying. This progressively worsens his mental state, eventually leading him to experience a full-on psychotic break, running around school naked and jumping out of the second-story window. And as someone who knows what it's like to have some of the most diabolical things you could imagine written about them in comment sections, honestly this reaction from Butters isn't that crazy, especially with how many comments he was reading.
It's a pretty brutal job sifting through all that darkness.
So with that, we have finally reached the most recent traumatic event Butters has experienced. But before that, let me do some honorable mentions that weren't quite traumatic enough to make the list, but I know people will bring them up in the comments, so here we go. In Season 20, his new girlfriend breaks up with him, which leads him to becoming an incel. It's not really traumatic at all, he just doesn't handle it very well. In Season 26, he's arrested for sexual harassment after pinching a classmate on St. Patrick's Day. In Going Native, he accidentally sinks an entire cruise ship with a golf ball. In Grounded Vindaloop, he is stabbed and almost killed while he thinks he's playing VR. Though with how confusing that episode became, I don't even think this actually happened, so I don't know. In The Tale of Scrody McBoogerballs, the love of his life, Kim Kardashian, is murdered by someone who read his book. And in the Tegrity Farms Halloween special, he had this weird relationship with a mummy that to this day I still don't even understand what it was supposed to be, so that one may or may not be traumatic, I don't even know really. But the final trauma that we will be talking about on the timeline comes from the post-COVID specials. The kids are all grown up and Butters is locked up in a mental asylum. It's revealed that he's basically an SCP being considered incredibly dangerous to everyone around him. This all started after he was left grounded in his room one day while his parents went to a movie. His parents never returned, and he was left locked in his room with an iPad for 16 years. During this time of social isolation, he went down some dark paths. He learned how to make money online. He became an expert in scamming people online through shilling NFTs, and even though he has become incredibly rich from doing so, it's clear that he's still struggling with the trauma of his former life.
I think Butters was a twerpy little loser kid whose parents didn't love him. My name's Vic Chaos.
He has become an actual supervillain with a traumatic supervillain backstory to match. Fortunately, the boys end up succeeding in their quest to change the timeline, and these events never actually end up happening. So even though this is the most threatening form of Butters we have ever seen, the real ending shows a man who's living a much happier life as an adult. A man who, despite all the horrific traumas he experienced throughout his childhood, was able to overcome them and go on to live happily. And if that's not a testament as to why his character is so universally loved, then I don't know what is. It's really the type of mindset that we could all learn something from. Even when things seem like they're as bad as they can get, a positive attitude can make all the difference. And besides, it can always get much, much worse. So with that, hopefully now we all have a better understanding of the many, many traumas of Butters Stotch.
Everyone knows it's Butters.
That's me.
Almeria e Barcelona, faltando 3 rodadas para acabar o Campeonato Espanhol. O Lanterna já rebaixado, o Barcelona já sem chance de título. Se você clicou é porque realmente você quer saber alguma coisa para começar, né? E tem algumas coisas para contar sobre esse jogo absolutamente sem história, tá? Assim, não tem... O jogo em si não tem muita história. Eu acho que alguns personagens aqui podem ser explorados, principalmente do ponto de vista positivo do Barcelona, o Héctor Forte e o Firmín Lopes, e também a volta do Vitor Roque, que pra gente chama bastante atenção, né? Para começar, o jogo foi tão monótono, tão ruim, que me fez repensar ou pensar ainda mais sobre se as ligas devem ter 20 clubes ou não. Porque, no final das contas, os últimos colocados têm um desnível muito grande e os jogos... A gente corre mais risco de ver jogos assim, né? Acho que se os jogadores estivessem descansados, se tivessem menos jogos para disputar, eles jogariam em mais alto nível por mais tempo e não se encher o calendário como enche para ter equipes que são tão desniveladas como a gente viu o Almeria durante essa temporada e o que acabou acontecendo. Enfim, cada vez eu estou mais convencido que precisaria jogar menos para se jogar melhor E o que tem que sobrar no calendário hoje são os piores times das ligas, né? Então, eu acho que ligas com menos times e menos jogos tende a melhorar o calendário dos jogadores e fazer com que eles atuem melhor. Enfim, o jogo foi tão ruim que eu tive tempo de pensar bastante nisso. Dito isso, o Almeria merecia sorte melhor, tá? Porque o Barcelona fez 1-0 com o Fermín Lopes no primeiro tempo, mas o Léo Batistão, o Imbarba e depois no segundo tempo, mais uma que agora não me lembro quem foi, o Almeria teve 3 cara a cara. Colocou uma bola na trave e 2 que saíram por muito pouco, que parecia mais fácil acertar o alvo e marcar do que perder. E o Almeria perdeu 3 gols, depois que faz 2-0, aí sim o jogo acaba, mas enquanto o jogo esteve 1-0, o Almeria merecia a melhor sorte. O resultado era injusto. Depois com 2-0 realmente fica difícil de falar de injustiça num 2-0, mas enquanto estava 1-0, o Barcelona não merecia vencer pelas que o Almeria tinha tido, embora o Lamine Yamal meio sem ângulo tenha chutado uma bola na trave, mas as chances mais claras da partida tenham sido do Almeria. De positivo desse jogo do Barcelona eu não vou nem falar do Pedri, que teve de novo um acerto muito grande de passes, acertou 95 de 105 passes, ou seja, o Pedri participou muito e participou muito bem, porque era um jogo sem tanta pegada, com mais espaço no meio campo, que era mais fácil, que realmente não exigia tanto assim, e nem criou tanto também esses 95 passes do Pedri, né? Para mim, o que eu acho que vale falar, Héctor Forte, que jogou como lateral esquerdo mais uma vez no lugar do João Cancelo e de novo jogou muito bem, contra o Atlético de Madrid, eu acho que foi o principal jogo que ele fez, e o Fermín Lopes. O Héctor Forte é mais um menor de idade, né? O Barcelona entrou em campo contra o Almeria com 3 menores de idade, o Paulo Barci, o Héctor Forte e o Lamine Yamal, e com meio time sub-21, porque ainda soma o Fermín Lopes e o Pedri, são 5 jogadores com 21 anos ou menos no time do Barcelona. Então eu acho que o Héctor Forte é um jogador que vem aparecendo bem, é um lateral direito que vem jogando bem na esquerda, porque o Koundé joga todos os minutos na lateral direita, é incrível a capacidade física do Koundé nessa temporada, né? E foi melhorando inclusive durante a temporada também, teve um bom início, um momento de baixa e depois melhorou. Mas eu não sei se é para o Héctor Forte já para a próxima temporada, porque tem a indefinição do Cancelo assumir um papel mais protagonista nesse time. Porque eu não acho que seja saudável ter tantos adolescentes jogando tanto tempo. Porque eles oscilam, né? A gente vê algumas oscilações do Lamine Yamal, do Paulo Barci, e o normal também é que isso aconteça com o Héctor Forte. Então acho que é mais inteligente que ele seja um lateral secundário, que o Barcelona não saia buscando muitos jogadores no mercado, mas sim um jogador para ir entrando aos poucos, para daqui a 2 temporadas talvez, ele está pronto para jogar. O que é o caso do Vitor Roque, de todo jovem, tá? Mais ou menos 20 anos de idade, é uma idade para se começar a ter um protagonismo maior. Se você vai olhar até o Real Madrid, o Camavinga, o Tchouaméni, o Rodrigo, o Vinícius, todos esses demoraram 1, 2 temporadas e meia, 3 temporadas talvez, para começar a aparecer no nível altíssimo que a gente está vendo. Então, gosto do Héctor Forte, 3 assistências já na temporada, mas eu não daria a ele na próxima temporada muito mais protagonismo. Mais do que ele tem nessa, acho que pode jogar mais vezes. Mas não, por exemplo, não ficar com o Cancelo, não buscar um lateral titular e já colocar ele para jogar todas as partidas. Enfim, temporada que vem volta o Baldé também, né? Que é mais um desses jovens e que teve uma lesão muscular grave. E o capítulo principal para falar de atuações individuais desse jogo, o Firmín. 2 gols, chegou a 10 na temporada, o Lewandowski tem 24, o Ferran Torres tem 11, aí depois vem João Félix, Rafinha e Fermín Lopes. 10 gols marcados, está empatado dentro de um top 5 de artilheiros do Barcelona na temporada e com todos os atacantes, né? Ferran, Rafinha, João Félix e Lewandowski, 4 atacantes. O Lamine Yamal, se eu não me engano, tem 7 gols na temporada. Não sei se eu vou conseguir achar isso fácil aqui, mas o Lamine Yamal tem menos gols do que esses outros jogadores não vou conseguir achar fácil, não. Na temporada, chama a atenção do Firmín que desses meio-campistas do Barcelona, por exemplo, o Pedri, que toca 95 vezes na bola, que dá ritmo de jogo, ele não é tanto disso. Ele é mais um jogador de entrar na área, de definir, muito atrevido, que é muito ganancioso e ambicioso para marcar, para fazer gols, e eu acho que isso é muito importante. É importante também os que controlam, os que dão ritmo, os que leem bem o jogo. Eu também acho que ele tem boa leitura de espaço, boa leitura de tempo, e é muito importante que os jogadores definam as jogadas, né? Vale muito pouco você ter tantos toques e tanto domínio e tanto controle e tanta boa leitura se você não marca e ele acrescenta isso para o time. O Firmín pode errar, nunca vai ser pela omissão. Ele sempre quer gol e marcar e ser agressivo, falta às vezes essa agressividade, acho que essa é a palavra, agressividade aos meio-campistas do Barcelona, e ele tem. Entra bem na área, finaliza bem, tenta chutes com o pé que não é o bom, além dos 2 gols que marcou, deu um tirambaço de pé esquerdo ainda no primeiro tempo que o goleiro defendeu. Eu acho que essa temporada de 10 gols e nenhuma assistência dele mostra muito bem essa ambição que ele tem de marcar. Primeira temporada dele no Barcelona, ele chegou para o time B e ele começou a treinar bem na pré-temporada, o Xavi gostou e puxou ele para o time principal. Eu acho que mostra bem como o Xavi, que tem, acho que, os seus defeitos e as suas limitações, principalmente, acho que o Xavi tem um teto, talvez, que a gente já tenha visto ele muito perto desse teto, mas acho que uma coisa que eu percebo aqui no dia a dia é que ele dá mérito a quem treina bem. Ele percebe que um jogador, a gente não vê os treinos, tá? Mas a gente percebe que um jogador tá merecendo, porque ele fala isso, o cara entra, e se ele desempenha bem no jogo também, ele é mantido no time. A gente viu que o João Félix começou bem a temporada, foi piorando. O Xavi tirou ele do time. João Félix é um grandíssimo fantasma hoje, né? A atuação dele mais uma vez foi horrorosa, os minutos que ele teve em campo. E o Firmino começou bem, ganhou o seu lugar e joga. O Pau Cubarsí começou a jogar bem, ganhou o seu lugar e joga. O Lamine Yamal a mesma coisa. O Rafinha, como meia pela esquerda, um falso ponta, também. Então eu gosto de que o Xavi tenha essa leitura de quem está treinando bem para jogar e para aproveitar o bom momento dos jogadores. E isso leva à avaliação final aqui, que é do Vitor Roque, né? Que voltou a jogar, ficou 5 jogos fora. Desses 5 jogos teve Paris Saint-Germain, Real Madrid, Valência e Girona. Paris Saint-Germain, Real Madrid e Girona são times acima, mais difíceis e resultados que eram muito importantes para o Barcelona. Primeiro, com o Paris Saint-Germain, mata-mata. O Real Madrid, ainda uma possível disputa pelo título. Naquele momento, o Real Madrid tinha 8 pontos mais que o Barcelona. Se o Barça ganhasse, ficaria a 5. Realmente não me parecia jogo para colocar um jogador em processo de adaptação. E depois contra o Girona, a mesma coisa, né? Os jogadores que entraram são os mais habituados a jogar. Lembrando que o Vitor Roque é um centroavante, então ele disputa a posição com o Lewandowski e depois com o Ferran Torres. E contra o Girona entrou o Ferran no lugar do Lewandowski. Contra o Valência talvez poderia ter jogado alguns minutinhos a mais. O Barcelona custa destravar aquele jogo, vinha de 2 derrotas consecutivas, então acho que também passa um pouco pela urgência daquele resultado. E no último jogo que ele não atuou, foi aqui em casa, o Barcelona ganhou de quem? Caramba, eu estava no jogo. Na segunda-feira o Barcelona jogou e ganhou. Real Sociedad 2-0. O Xavi depois na entrevista disse que o Vitor Roque não jogou, porque tinha tomado uma pancada no treino. Contra o Valência também ele não estava 100% fisicamente, tá? E por isso ele não jogou. Então, dos 5 jogos seguidos que ele não atuou, dá para entender a importância do jogo, o tamanho do jogo, que ainda não era para ele, e outra questão física. Hoje ele jogou os seus minutinhos, o que eu acho que é justo. Que ele entre num jogo decidido, que jogue 20 minutos e que depois ele jogue 15, que depois talvez ele entre de cara, que nesses jogos decididos ele vá jogando. Dá para notar a ansiedade do Vitor Roque, né? Os números dele. 6 toques na bola, 1 finalização no alvo, 2 passes, os 2 corretos, ganhou 1 de 4 duelos, fez uma falta, tomou um cartão amarelo. Me parece o com mais espírito, o que mais quer, o que mais precisa de mostrar, absolutamente ansioso, fora do ritmo dos outros, porque a pressão e tudo isso e tal, e acho que ele quer muito, faz com que ele veja toda bola e toda jogada como a última possível para mostrar alguma coisa, né? E eu acho que isso é lógico que piora o desempenho do jogador, que deixa mais ansioso, que faz errar mais, entra num jogo que já estava decidido contra o último colocado e tal, e com o próprio Barcelona pouco interessado e querendo só que os minutos passassem, que acabasse, e um jogador ali querendo ganhar a vida, quase que literalmente, dentro de campo. Então, eu já disse algumas vezes que eu acho que o Vitor Roque só mereceria críticas pela qualidade do seu jogo a partir da próxima temporada, de começar no mesmo nível físico dos outros, fazer uma pré-temporada, onde se tem mais tempo para treinar, porque durante a temporada, se bem que o Barcelona com as eliminações até teve mais tempo nessa temporada, mas normalmente o que acontece durante a temporada, você chega de um jogo, no dia seguinte você faz só trabalho de recuperação, você viaja para o jogo seguinte e joga, então durante a temporada não tem tanto treino assim, e para a próxima temporada eu acho que vale críticas. Se na próxima temporada o Vitor Roque entrar em 20 minutos em campo, tiver esses números, eu acho que merece já começar a ser criticado. E se ele tiver o desempenho que ele tem até aqui, merece já. Por enquanto não. Por enquanto é entender que está adaptando, que nem era para ter chegado agora e chegou, e que está nesse processo de entender como que as coisas funcionam. Assim como o Xavi disse na entrevista coletiva pré-jogo. Existe todo esse ruído externo da expectativa, do preço, das críticas da imprensa, do desejo da torcida. Existe no Brasil ainda um fator extra, né? Que são as críticas dos brasileiros ao Xavi, que não conseguem entender por que outros jogam e o Vitor Roque não. Eu consigo entender. Eu acho realmente que os outros estão, neste momento, mais preparados que o Vitor Roque. Mas apesar de todo esse ruído que tem, se a gente pega só o que o técnico está fazendo, ele está dando alguns minutos para um jogador que o próprio técnico admitiu que não era para ter chegado agora. E que já que chegou agora, que ele treine, que ele entenda, que ele vá observando seus companheiros e que ele jogue também aí os seus minutinhos para já ir começando a pegar gosto pela coisa, começando a pegar um pouco mais de ritmo também de futebol europeu. A partir daqui, se na temporada que vem ele não vai ter espaço, se o técnico entender que esse desenvolvimento dele vai demorar e que é melhor que ele faça esse desenvolvimento fora do clube porque aqui ele não vai jogar do que dentro, o técnico pode estar certo ou errado. Mas o que a gente viu até aqui da temporada me parece coerente o que o Xavi está fazendo. O Xavi não esperava ele, não precisava de um centroavante, porque já tem 2, e está colocando ele para jogar alguns minutos e tentando fazer com que ele aprenda e se desenvolva mais nos treinamentos. Então, não critico o Vitor Roque pelo jogo e nem pela qualidade do que ele mostrou até aqui. E eu acho que ele está num processo absolutamente natural de aprender futebol europeu. Vinícius, Rodrigo e tantos outros demoraram também, e ele também vai demorar. Acho que nem a partir da próxima temporada é normal que ele já comece brilhando, e acho que ele ainda fica um passo atrás de outros pelo estilo de jogo muito específico do Barcelona, que não é o estilo de jogo que ele praticava no Brasil. Enfim, já falei disso aqui com vocês várias vezes. É isso, meu povo. O Barça ganhou do Almeria, um jogo desinteressante pela tabela e por todo o resto, mas que serviu para Héctor Forte, para Firmino e para a gente rever o Vitor Roque por alguns minutinhos e para eu também poder divagar muito tempo sobre 20 clubes em uma liga. Com esse resultado, o Barcelona praticamente garante o segundo lugar, né? Abre 4 pontos em relação ao Girona, faltam 6 pontos em disputa. Se o Barcelona ganhar um dos 2 jogos que restam, ele será segundo colocado. E para que vale ser segundo colocado? Para jogar a Supercopa, para ganhar 8 milhões de euros. Então, ser segundo lugar é bom, e também para poder, uma vez disputando a Supercopa, ganhar um título a mais, né? Mas economicamente é o primeiro ganho que já se tem sendo segundo colocado, então por isso é importante para o Barça terminar à frente do Girona e aparentemente vai fazer isso. Girona nessa rodada tropeçou, desde que ganhou do Barcelona 2 tropeços, né? Empatou com o Alavés e depois perdeu do Villarreal e o Barcelona conseguiu 2 vitórias, então reultrapassou o Girona. Meu povo, tá falado, hein? 14 minutos de um Almeria 0, Barcelona 2. Se vocês chegarem até aqui, não se inscreverem no canal e não deixarem um like, eu não sei mais o que vocês precisam para fazer esses 2 passos. Se vocês assistiram 14 minutos de um vídeo de Almeria e Barcelona, vocês merecem um like e merecem que as pessoas se inscrevam no canal de vocês, mesmo que vocês não produzam conteúdo. Agora, se puder fazer isso aqui também, eu agradeço. Valeu, gente. Um beijo para vocês. Boa noite. Até a próxima. E juízo também. É quinta-feira, né? Juízo. Mais ou menos. Valeu, gente.